Monday the 1st of June. I can work out percentages. To start off today, we have a little warm-up. So have a look at this question. Here is a number pyramid. The number in the box is the product of the two numbers below it. Write the missing number. Remember, product means when you multiply two numbers together. So just to give you a bit of a reminder, the number in the box, 5, is the product of the two numbers below it. So 2 multiplied by something makes 5. If you can't print out the sheet that goes with this lesson, simply copy this down and work out the 3 empty boxes. Moving on to percentages. If we remind ourselves about fractions, so what I have here is a grid made up of 100 squares. If I shade in 3 of those squares, any 3 squares, I have shaded 3 out of 100, 3 over 100, 3 hundredths. If I was to shade 50 of those squares and you stand back and have a look, you can see that I have shaded half of the grid. 50 out of 100, 50 over 100 is the same as a half. Now, percentages are simply the numerator when the denominator is 100. So 50 out of 100, 50 hundredths is the same as 50%. If I were to shade in 75 of those little squares, then I have shaded in 75 out of 100, 75 over 100, 75 hundredths, or 75%. Now, what I have here is 100 square with 10 of the little squares shaded in. So I have shaded in 10%, 10 out of 100. Now, if I simplify 10 hundredths, I get 1/10. That is proving that 10% is the same as 1/10. 10% and 1/10 are exactly the same. Now we should know how to work out 1/10 of a number. To work out 1/10 of a number, we divide by 10. Just like to work out 1/2 of a number, we divide by 2. To work out 1/4 of a number, we divide by 4. So to work out 1/10 of a number, we divide by 10. So the question is, how do we find 1/10 of a number? We divide by 10. So how do we find 10% of a number? We divide by 10. To work out 10% of a number, we divide by 10. Now, do not be tricked into thinking that to work out 1% of a number, we divide by 1. Because when we divide by 1, nothing changes. 1% means one little square filled in. It means 1 out of 100, 1/100th. And to work out 1/100th of a number, we divide by 100. To work out 1% of a number, we divide by 100. And that makes sense. If we're dividing by 10 to work out 1/10 of a number, to work out 10% of a number, 1% is 10 times smaller. We've got to divide by a bigger number. So recap on that again. To work out 10% of a number, we divide by 10. To work out 1% of a number, we divide by 1. Divide by 100. I can find percentages of numbers. So if we can find 10% of a number, then we can find 20% of that number. Because 20% of that number is simply 10% add 10%. It's 2 lots of 10%. Or we could find out 10% and multiply it by 2. 2 lots of 10% makes 20%. In the same way, 30% is made up with 3 lots of 10%. So 10% and 10% and 10%. And we can either work out 10% and then add it together 3 times, or we can work out 10% and multiply it by 3. Now, if we go back to this one here, we can see if we stand back, we have 1/4 of the big square is shaded in, and we can see that that is 25 little squares. 1/4 and 25% are exactly the same. This is what is called a known fact. We should just know that 25% and 1/4 are the same. So if we want to work out 25% of a number, we can work out 10% and 10% and 5% and put it all together, but it's much quicker to just know that it is a quarter. Likewise, if we want to work out 50% of a number, we should just know that 50% is the same as a half. And to work out a half of a number, we divide by 2. 3/4 of a number is the same as 75%. We could work out 70% by working out 10% and multiplying it by 7 and then adding on 5%, but it's much quicker to think of it as 3/4 of the number, working out 1/4 and timesing it by 3. They are 3 known facts that we do have to know off by heart. Now, you have a sheet to work on today, which I've given you as a Word document, and in that sheet you are working out 10% of numbers, 20% of numbers, 90% of numbers, so you're working out multiples of 10% of numbers, and you're also using known facts. All of those are mixed in together to keep you on your toes. There'll be more about percentages tomorrow.